It's an honor to join this important conversation, and I'd like to thank the Horn of Africa Policy Center for creating a space where law, history, and live reality are not discussed separately, but brought into a dialogue with one another. It's precisely at this intersection that the Afar experience becomes central to our discussion. We
Sorry.
are here today to speak about the Afar people, but in doing so, we are also engaging with a broader question about governance, peace, and development in the Horn of Africa. Uh, next, next slide. Yes, this. For decades, indigenous rights, locally and globally, discourse has focused on recognition through law and declaration. Yet, for many communities, including the Afar, this recognition has not translated into a meaningful change on the ground. This gap between what recognition on paper and what is lived in reality is not incidental. It signals a deeper structural problem. As today's sessions have shown, historical marginalization, political exclusion, legal framework, and long-standing patterns of human rights violation documented within international legal frameworks. Taken all together, this contribution raised a deeper question that often remain unresolved in international discussion. Next, please. Why does the recognition of rights so often fail to translate into protection, dignity, and lasting stability on the ground? I would like to suggest that one of the core answers lies in how we understand self-determination, particularly when it comes to indigenous people such as the Afar. Next, please. In international law, the right to self-determination is firmly established, appearing in the UN Charter, the International Covenants, and this decade of legal practice. Yet, for many indigenous people, including the Afar, self-determination remains largely symbolic. This is because it's often treated as a matter of, of recognition rather than capacity. This, this distinction has real consequence. Recognition asks a legal question. Is the right acknowledged in law, while capacity asking a political and practical question? Does the people actually have the power to shape its political, economic, and social future? Without capacity, recognition becomes fragile and sometimes meaningless. In many contexts, indigenous peoples are firmly recognized while remaining structured, included from decision making. They are consulted but not empowered, heard but not followed, acknowledged but not intertrust with authority. These gaps between recognition and capacity is where self-determination begins to feel in practice, becoming most visible when we move from law to land, water, and resources. Next, please. This brings us to why resources matter in defining self-determination. For indigenous peoples, resources are not simply central in identity, survival, social organization, and political autonomy. Land shapes belonging, water sustains life and movement, and access to resources determines whether communities can remain self, self-sufficient or become dependent. When people are denied meaningful control over the resources, self-determination becomes theoretical rather than real. In the Afar case, this is not only historical marginalization or political exclusion. It's about the systematic removal of decision-making power over territory, land use, and resources, the very elements that sustain communal life and culture continuity. Control over resources determine who decides development priorities, who bears environmental costs, and who benefit from economic activity. When these decisions are centralized and imposed, indigenous people are reduced from political actors to administrative subjects. This is not a natural process. It's a form of governance that produces dependency, grievance, and long-term instability. The FAR case allows us to see how this dynamic unfold in practice and why they are not unique to one community. Next, please. What makes what makes the Afar case particularly revealing is that it reflects a pattern seen across many indigenous contexts globally. In different regions, indigenous peoples face similar dynamics: formal recognition of identity without meaningful participation, development imposed without consent, and security frameworks centered on control rather than inclusion. This recurring pattern suggests that the marginalization of the Afar is not an exception, but a part of a broader structured failure in how state engage with indigenous people. It's a window into a governance model that prioritizes territorial control over political partnership and short-term stability over long-term legitimacy. This creates a cycle in which marginalization produces grievance, and grievance produces instability, and instability is then used to justify future exclusion. Breaking these cycles requires more than humanitarian response or legal acknowledgement. It requires governance arrangements that return agency to the people themselves. The Congress of Nations and States reflect this understanding and was created by indigenous people to ensure that this right is realized amongst all indigenous people, nations, and states around the world. More importantly, the CNS Charter emphasized the importance of not only agency, but also equality as essential foundations for self-determination. At this point, a common concern often emerged whenever solutions are discussed. Next, please. Here, it's important to address a common fear. Autonomy, especially over resources, is often prioritized as a threat to state sovereignty or national unity, and sometimes as a step toward oppression. However, global experience suggests that opposite. When autonomy is well designed, it tends to reduce conflict rather than fuel it. It provides indigenous community with a stake in stability rather than a reason to resist the state. Autonomy is not about suppression. It's about shared governance grounded in justice. Indigenous governance experiences around the world show that autonomy, when supported by clear legal frameworks and meaningful participation, often strengthens the state cohesion rather than weakening it. When indigenous peoples are treated as governance partner rather than security concerns, autonomy becomes a stabilizing force, reducing conflict, building trust, and reinforcing legitimacy. For the Afar, recognizing autonomy, control over resources is not a call to dismantle the state, but a way to rebuild legitimacy by aligning governance with lived realities. This perspective reflects a broader line of work by Congress of Nations and States, which brings together indigenous people and nations to promote shared frameworks of self-determination, resources governance, and long-term stability.
Therefore, to move from principle to practice, I would like to propose three simple guidance principles that can inform future discussion around far rights and self-determination. Uh, we are in slide 8.
Okay.
First, consent. No decision affecting a far land or resources should be made without their free, prior, and informed consent. Consultation alone is not enough if it doesn't meaningfully influence outcomes. Consent is not an obstacle to governance, it's a source for legitimacy. Second, control. Participation must go beyond advisory rules. Indigenous institutions and representatives must have real authority in resource governance. Without control, participation remains symbolic rather than meaningful. Third, continuity. Resources governance must protect not only present interests but the rights of future generations, socially, culturally, and environmentally. Sustainable governance is measured not by immediate gains but by long-term resilience. These are not radical demands. They are the minimum conditions for sustainable peace and reflect the principle that indigenous people themselves have articulated collectively through shared charters and resolution. Next, please. This brings us to why this discussion matters for peace and stability. Peace is often understood as the absence of violation, but history teaches us that peace without justice is temporary. Indigenous like the Horn of Africa, where borders, identities, and resources intersect, the exclusion of indigenous people from governance significantly increases the risk of instability. The Afar experience reminds us that peace can't be imposed from above. It must be built from within, through dignity, participations, and autonomy. When indigenous peoples are denied control over their resources, conflict is postponed, not resolved. When they are recognized as a political actor with agency, peace becomes possible. For the Afar people to move from marginalization to meaningful peace, the right to govern their resources must be treated not as a political concession, but as a legal and moral necessity. Next, please. In conclusion, I would like to leave you with this reflection. Self-determination is not a reward granted after stability is achieved. It's a foundation upon which stability is built. Thank you.